So I have had so many people reach out and ask me, when are you going to give us a deep dive on Podcast Movement Evolutions 2023? So that is what today is all about. I actually polled our Instagram audience as well as the Facebook group, and I heard back that y'all wanted to hear about podcast ads and AI. You wanted to hear about video podcasting as well as brand deals. Like, how do you get brand deals for a small audience? And I just have so much to share. So let's get right to it. Okay, first and foremost, Podcast Movement Evolutions this year was in Las Vegas. It was so much fun. I came back thinking, oh my gosh, I just drank from a fire hose and have so many new ideas and so many fun things to share with you. But I feel a little overwhelmed with how many new things that I learned, and I wanted to share some of those with you here today without overwhelming you, right? So we're just going to do a super high level of everything that happened, all the fun talks that I attended. And if you're watching the video, then you're going to see some pictures and fun things behind the scenes that I shared. So make sure you check out the video after you listen to this. But okay, let's just dive right in because like I said, we have a lot to cover today. So the first day, this was a really fun talk. We started with podcast ad creatives, how the industry can be more efficient and effective. So this was like right out of the gate. It had the words AI in it. So I was like, okay, we gotta go to this one. Sounds super fun, really cool. I have to tell you, AI is the buzzword of 2023, right? With ChatGPT and all the other things, like people just want to know, how can I use this tool to my advantage? And it's funny because, I mean, these tools have been around for a while, right? You have one on your phone you probably talk to regularly. You have one that's probably in your kitchen or your office or your bedroom that you also talk to regularly. I'm not going to say their names, right? Because they're probably going to wake up and start talking to you. But this has been around. It's just a new way of using AI. But what I learned in this talk is they were talking about how can advertisers use these tools to their advantage. And what they were talking about is using AI voices. And it's funny because, you know, we get a little squeamish when we think about like, oh, I don't want to be replaced by, you know, a robot or, you know, some machine. But at the end of the day, these aren't to the level of that yet. I'm not going to say that they won't be ever, but they're not there yet. So I look at this as like a learning opportunity of, well, how can I make either my ads or my podcast episodes or any pieces of my content more specific to me where I'm not worried about an AI or a robot or something else taking my job? And I think that that's what you should think about too, is what are some of the things that you can do to infuse your content with more of you? And I like to think about it with stories and other personal examples and other things that aren't just facts and figures and information, because that is literally like the definition of, you know, robots and AI. It's data. And whenever you can pull in more of your story and who you are into the mix, then it's just going to help you stand out from the robots. I know this sounds like a weird conversation, but it's true. It's what I kept thinking about the whole time I was in this talk is podcast ads. Yes, we're starting to see some AI generated content, but I don't think it's not there yet. Okay. We'll say that. That was the biggest thing. My biggest takeaway is it's not there yet. But I do think that we should continue to watch this and look at it and see how we can use some of these tools to our advantage. The next one. So this one was called View from the Top. And I'm going to read you this little description. It says, podcasting is changing fast. This panel brings together leaders from across the podcast industry to discuss what's happening in podcasting. So I wanted to share a little bit about who was there. So this was James Cridland, who he has Pod News and Pod News Weekly, which are a great podcast if you're interested in learning what's going on in the industry. Then we had someone from Amplify Media, Wondery, Tenderfoot TV, and Guggenheim Partners. And they were talking about, so it was a panel, they were talking about how things are happening in the industry. And they were really specifically talking about the financial impact of the larger like macroeconomic podcast industry, where these bigger players like Spotify, Apple, Google, like all the really big ones are starting to gobble up some of these smaller companies, right? They were talking about mergers and acquisitions that have been happening, or some of the other, larger players that are coming through and gobbling up the smaller ones. And it's all a good thing because it means it's an infusion of investment dollars and the financial commitment to podcasting. But it also was very super high level. I don't think that the majority of this audience probably even cares about it that much, other than you should just know, like, the major takeaway from that is people are investing in podcasting. And it's just another reason for you to not be worried that the industry is going away, or that, their focus is somewhere else. Like this is a good thing. It's a very good thing to know that people are paying attention to podcasting. So really, really fun. That was the big takeaway from that talk. The next one is how to talk to yourself, lessons learned from 1,000 podcast episodes. And this was my talk. So a lot of fun. Of course, I'm going to have lots of things to say. But let me just read you my little description. It says, podcasters want to create content with confidence. Let's all feel less awkward talking into a microphone or camera when no one else is around. You'll walk away from this talk more confident in how you talk to yourself and your audience. So what's really funny is I'm recording this right now, talking to myself, right? Talking into a camera, talking into a microphone, completely by myself. Nobody else is in here. And I had several people come up to me afterwards and say, the number one takeaway from this talk was knowing that it's okay to be awkward. That just made me so happy, so happy, because a lot of this talk really centered around, we don't really like our own voices, and it's something that really is awkward. Like, even if you're a trained public speaker or you're someone that's been on stage, like I literally learned in college how to break down a presentation and present it in front of a boardroom or in front of a large group of people. And so presenting on stages and presenting, with a microphone in my hand, like all of that, like it felt so comfortable to me when I'm in front of a bunch of people. But when you're behind the mic and it's just you, like it gets awkward, it gets weird. So it was great to share my experience there and just let you know, like, this is my reminder to you, like, it's okay to feel awkward recording your content, recording your podcast. It's totally normal. And it was just so fun. All right. So the next talk, building podcast franchises. So maybe you're like, well, what the heck is a podcast franchise? What does that look like? So I'm going to read this description to you. It says, what makes a podcast a franchise? How can podcast creators engage fans and grow their fandom beyond the podcast content? Hear from Wondery's head of franchise development, Nicole Blake, and other franchise creators from Smartless Media and Ballin Studios on how they are growing their brand and podcast content to further the fan experience for audiences. Learn about how to deeper engage fans and expand your IP beyond the podcast. Yes, you heard that right. Smartless Media was there and they had a big presence. Like, there were people. So in this talk in particular, it had their CEO and president of Smartless Media, which, if you don't know, that's the Smartless podcast. I've talked about it many times. We've done a case study here on the podcast about it. I'll link in the show notes to it. But they talked about so many cool things. So they actually didn't even have a CEO or president of their media company, I think, until about a year ago. And then they hired this person on, and he came in and really kind of monetized their brand in a much bigger way. Like, they, brought on the live tours that they did, which behind the scenes, they created a documentary. So that's going to be a docuseries, and just so many other fun things. They just released their merch. Like, they have hoodies and t-shirts and all these things. So they are taking their brand from just a podcast to now it is other things, right? It is the merchandise. It is virtual, in-person things. Like, it is so much bigger than just a podcast. And I just had so many takeaways. One of them was, and actually the franchise development person from Wondery worked on Harry Potter. Whoa, right? Like, what a brand to work with, like, such a large fan base, right? I'm sure you're like, oh my gosh, Harry Potter. Like, everybody knows what Harry Potter is because they did such a great job, like, branching out. It's kind of like, Harry Potter is like the next Star Wars. And I feel like there is just so many like ways that you can commoditize your brand and have this just reach that goes so much far to infinity and beyond. That's really what came to my mind, than just what you're creating in an audio file. So my biggest takeaway was make once, monetize many. And I thought this was such a good phrase. So I'm going to say again, make once, monetize many. And so the idea behind that is, what can you do to repurpose your content and monetize it? What can you do to take something and strip it out and use it in a different way? So these aren't new concepts that we haven't talked about here before. I just love the idea of how it was framed, in that let's take what you're already doing and figure out a way to monetize. So for anybody that's listening or watching this, you can think about it as like, well, what can you do with this content? Can you put it in a webinar? Can you add it to one of your paid products? Can you create a paid product out of what you're teaching? Can you take a few podcast episodes and create a course out of what you've already done? So the idea isn't always create from scratch. Like, you are using the things you've already done and you're going to monetize it that way. So awesome talk. I love this so much. I loved hearing from all these industry executives on how they look at podcasting and content creation, because it kind of helps me get a pulse on the bigger macro podcasting industry.